This is a game about kicking ground sharks so they bounce off buildings and land in a place where you can immobilize them using psychic barbed wire so you can shoot them with mind fireballs before they go under again. Does that interest you? Then stick around, maybe this is the kind of game you enjoy. I'm going to just be honest with you guys, I have officially ran out of ideas of how to start videos about long-awaited sequels. This is getting ridiculous. We got No More Heroes 3 and Psychonauts 2, but let's not forget the great Ace Attorney Chronicles that took 6 years to get translated. It's not a sequel, but hey, if we really want a sequel, how about Evil Genius 2? It also dropped this year, even though that ended up being a much lower key release. Oh, and Shin Megami Tensei V is just around the corner too, and honestly, I have no idea what happened. Is this some sort of positive karma coming back around to compensate for 2020 being such a bad year? It's just, I cannot. I have lost the ability to can. So let's just skip to the chase and to talk about the actual game. What makes The World Ends With You getting a sequel such an interesting case study, however, is that The World Ends With You is a game that just can't repeat itself. It doesn't matter if the developers wanted to just cash in on the name and make a sequel that is as close to the original game as possible and put barely any effort in it, they just can't make a repeat of the first one that is more polished with a new cast, even if that's all they wanted the most in the world, and that's because the original game was released on the Nintendo DS. Wait, no, let me rephrase that. The Nintendo DS was brought into life just so that games like The World Ends With You could be made in the first place. That's how perfect of a pairing they were. Now, I know it got a re-release on phones and the Nintendo Switch, I think. I don't know, I'm not sure, but I'm sorry to say that I didn't play those. I did play, however, the original one on the Nintendo DS, and oh man, oh boy, you can do a lot of stuff with the dual screen setup of the Nintendo DS. You can take the simple route and just use the lower screen as a map or as a menu/inventory, or you can do what Square Enix did and go batshit insane and make the player control 2 characters at the same time. That's right, the original game had you control a character on the top screen and a different one on the bottom screen. It was nuts, it was hectic, it was something that could only be done on the Nintendo DS. And when Square Enix refused to pick up the series, even when Nintendo extended the life of the dual screen setup with the 3DS, that's when they fucked up and missed the chance to do a sequel that improves on the concepts of the original game for the rest of, well, existence basically, as far as we know. But, on the other hand, now is the perfect chance for them to reassess every aspect of the original game and figure out what worked, what didn't, and what they can bring to the current generation of consoles. And boy, did they bring out an absolute banger of a game. It helps that instead of a port or a remake that would have to live forever under the shadows of the original game, they just decided to just move forward instead into a sequel, which is something I always appreciate games doing instead of endlessly trying to return to the first entry. You know who you are, you know what you're doing, stop it. So, the story of Neo picks up about 3 years after the story of the first game, taking place once again in Shibuya, where main protagonist Rindo is going to meet up with his friend Fred, and you know, they're just going to have a good time, hang around, and it seems like a usual day until everything explodes and colorful anime battles are happening all around them. Suddenly, Rindo receives a vision from the future which he uses to save Fred from being crushed under a flying truck. Normally, this is the part where you would suspect that I'm trying to sum up the plot in a funny way, but no, that is literally what happens about 10 minutes after you start the game. It's wild. As it turns out, both of them end up in the underground, a sort of alternate plane of reality where they are unable to interact with people in the real ground, which is the normal plane of reality. They are given a few pins by Nomura's newest GOT-GF design and told that they now have psychic powers and that they can use the pins to manifest abilities in order to fight the noise, which is your usual JRPG deadly fauna but with cool tribal tattoos on them. Their mission isn't to fight the noise though, but instead to survive the Reaper's game, a series of deadly challenges organized by a group of mysterious, villainous, but kind of mostly wacky figures known as, you guessed it, the Reapers. If they win the game, they can wish for anything, including to go back to the real ground, but if they lose, they face complete erasure from existence. Thus begins Rindo's and company struggles to win the Reaper's game and get out of this mess. It's an interesting enough setup. It's a similar but just a bit different from the original game. This time, instead of pairs, players of the Reaper's game are organized in groups, meaning you get the chance to carry a full JRPG style party this time around. And while the concepts and themes tackled in the game are interesting, my main problem is that the pacing of the story can best be described as glacial. The story of the game is divided into days, since the Reaper's game goes on for 7 days. And if you know anything about the original game, you also know that the game goes on for multiple weeks. And sometimes it feels like the writer just came up with random plot beats just to fill for time so we can get the full 7 days. This is a big problem if you're coming in with some basic memory of the previous game, since the way the Reaper's game works will be familiar to you, yet the characters will only get the full picture at day 7, meaning you have completed a relatively sizable chunk of the game before the characters catch up with what you already know. Not that not playing the original game helps either, since the pacing is just so glacially slow, you will undoubtedly figure out what is going to happen long before other characters just blatantly describe it word for the main cast to understand. And also a few twists near the end require knowledge of the previous game and of the extra content from the re-releases, which I did not play. So fucking thanks, Akiko Ishibashi. Yeah, I know you, I can Wikipedia your name. Impressed yet? Also not helping matters is that when the game really wants to push out some character development, they begin to write the cast in that traditional JRPG way where they develop and learn more about themselves at the speed of dumb, because they are dumb, and you can easily guess the lesson that they need to learn, and even then you have to read through dialogue or a series of dialogues that are excruciatingly slow, since you already know exactly at what conclusion they will arrive because they need to arrive there to learn their moral of the story, you know? And let's not even talk about the moments when characters pull out information out of their asses while never explaining where they got it. Just guess the writer thought we shouldn't think about too much about that, huh? Suffice it to say, Neo The World Ends With You is way more concerned at being emotional than intellectual in its ambitions. And while I don't think you need to pick one or the other, in fact, the best emotional stories still carry a rock-solid foundation of plot beneath them so you can more easily suspend your disbelief. But I digress. My point is that it would be a dick move to not mention that the game comes with plenty of heartwarming and truly emotional moments within it as well. In one particular moment that stands out, Rindo must travel back in time, an ability that he usually uses to fight battles in the past to better his standing in present time, but instead of fighting, it is purely a long series of narrative moments in which the player must select an option from a series of dialogue options in order to comfort another character and get them ready to face an awful truth in the future. Suffice it to say, that moment hit me like a punch in the gut. But for most of the time, the plot is barely existent. I mean, it's not like there isn't dialogue and writing, there is a lot of dialogue and there is a lot of writing. But as for the plot itself, most of the time you are merely following breadcrumbs of mystery until the very end when the game decides to dump all remaining plot points on top of your head at once. And until then, you mostly get carried through the story through character interactions, so how much you enjoy the story depends on how much you enjoy the characters, which I did greatly. But there was one standout character that I really liked and that I personally think is standout not only among the cast of the game, but amongst game characters in general, and that is Nagi Usui. Nagi is a bit of a misleading character at first, but in a good way, you know, the way that subverts your expectations without also being shitty writing, that way. She is introduced by rambling about her favorite game and how failing to get a merchandise pin of a character she loves is the end of the road and how life isn't worth living anymore. She barely speaks a single sentence that makes sense to the baffled main character, and unfortunately she kind of accidentally dives into his mind so she can hear every unflattering thought he's currently having, which makes her want to throw down until Rindo rewinds time. Basically, she's introduced as a complete psycho. And he gets her to join the party by, get this, giving her the pin she wanted. He goes back in time to get the pin she wanted. And then she immediately crushes on another party member when she joins the party because he looks like the video game guy she has the hots for. Hoo boy, that's kind of a bad first impression. Not to say that she couldn't have been funny and likable as a one-note character, but characters like her have a bad track record in media in general for being one-note jokes that just keep repeating themselves for the duration of the media. And on a 50-hour-long JRPG, that is a pretty repetitive character to be around, and you probably don't want that. However, thankfully, she's a lot deeper than she first appears. She doesn't actually talk about the game she likes all the time. In fact, when given the opportunity to help other people, she actually recommends trying other hobbies or other apps instead of just shoving her favorite game in everyone's faces. She gets along pretty well with almost everybody in the cast, and there's quite a fun explanation for her anxiety attacks that I won't spoil. But perhaps the greatest revelation ever is that her power of diving into people's minds wasn't given randomly. She actually got it because, get this, she is really good at reading social cues. No joke, that's her best superpower. She's a gamer who can read social cues. Okay, that's it, we're done. Nagi Usui, best character 2021. I'm giving that award to her right now. So yeah, while the story isn't without its flaws, it is propped up by great characters to get you through the boring bits. Thankfully though, the game has 2 other cards on its sleeve to keep you engaged, and that's absolute style and actually pretty good gameplay. In terms of style, well, just look at what you've been looking at so far. The game is gorgeous, it's got that timeless cel-shaded look, but it's even more than that. The creators clearly love Shibuya, the real-life district that the game takes place in, and they did their best to translate the feeling of Shibuya to the game rather than just the look of it. We have giant skyscrapers rising to the very tip of the sky while looking like they could tip over any time, giving a glimpse at how it must feel to look at those gigantic constructions from up close, trying to get you to understand how imposing they feel. Other times they don't even need to be far. Tipsy Toes How just straight up feel like it's going to fall on top of you while twisting itself into impossible shapes as you walk down the street. And then there's whatever Super Mario Galaxy type bullshit is happening with this street. It's clear that the devs had a lot of fun coming up with as many different optical illusions as they could shove into this game, which makes it truly look and feel like absolutely nothing else in the market. And get this, they went into so much detail that every single individual place you can visit in this game even has their own stylish logo. The streets themselves have logos. It's fantastic, and all of this is possible thanks to the fixed camera angle the game uses while exploring the city, so the developers can show you the exact angles they want you to see. And it's what makes all of those optical illusions great. So congratulations Neo, the road ends with you. You get a spot on the hall of good games that use fixed camera angles and are not horror. It's not just the optical illusions that are great though. The dialogue UI has this really slick comic book style look, and characters can suddenly start talking while you walk normally through the streets and they have their own little conversations on the top of the screen. It's great. My favorite ones are the dialogues that play when you pass in front of a restaurant and the characters mention that they are hungry. It's a good reminder to the players of a mechanic that I will get back to later. And speaking of Shibuya, there are a shit ton of shops and restaurants everywhere. I don't remember a single street that didn't give me the opportunity to buy something. And that's great, it really goes into the shopping and fashion paradise angle of Shibuya and makes the game very distinct in comparison to other RPGs, which are mostly composed of wilderness and dungeons and usually just let you shop at specific villages. if they have more than one shop at all. I usually prefer games that take place in one big huge city than a bunch of separate villages, because usually that means that the city is actually properly established and feels like a real place. A lot of games have this problem, which is not always a problem. Sometimes it's just an artistic choice, while other times it's because of limitations, which means yeah, it's kind of a problem, but they didn't really have a choice. But the thing is, a lot of them have this thing where villages are composed of 5 houses and 3 of them are shops, where the world feels empty and the population just feels unsustainable. So I feel like the easiest way to fix this problem is to just have one big town. But that doesn't mean I enjoy every video game city. At times, a lot of them can feel like they are just copy-pasted gray squares. Well, here comes an example of a video game with a primarily urban design that kicks ass and has every single corner look distinct and interesting. That game is this one. The one we're talking about right now, in case you didn't notice. And it has not only some of the best concrete jungle art direction I've seen in a while, it also has one of the most interesting and well-realized settings in JRPG land, period. So yeah, it's pretty good. And that is also reflected in the soundtrack. Speaking of the soundtrack, this game solves one of the fundamental problems a lot of people have with JRPGs as well, and that is the repetitiveness of the music. A lot of JRPGs, so many to the point I think it's well over 90% of them, usually only have one battle theme, or very similar battle theme variations, outside of boss battles of course, which leads to a lot of repetitiveness and soundtrack fatigue. Nioh here though has almost an opposite problem. It has so many tracks for every single situation that it's really hard for you to hear a track that you enjoy for more than a minute. You're walking around and you hear a track. You pause, the pause menu has a different track. You go back to walking, the track has changed. You enter a shop, track changes. Go back, the track changed again, and then you enter a battle where you can end up hearing any of 10 plus battle tracks. It's absolutely fucking crazy. Even crazier is just how banger-filled the soundtrack is. It might be the most banging soundtrack of the year. This game does not joke around when it's time to break out the hits. Damn. But we are kind of getting sidetracked here. We have to get to the next point. Oh, well, okay, one more cool fact. About halfway through the game, you get the ability to dash, to get through the streets faster. And if you dash in rhythm with the music, you get to boost your groove bar. The soundtrack is even integrated with the gameplay itself. Damn. As for the groove meter, don't worry about it. We're going to talk about it soon enough, since it's about time we delve into the gameplay, which is also part of the style of the game. Why? Because this is a game about kicking ground sharks so they bounce off buildings and land in a place where you can immobilize them using psychic barbed wire so you can shoot them with mind fireballs before they go under again. It is unapologetically anime about everything it does, and I think that's what is going to make or break the game for a lot of people. While you're walking around the streets, you can switch to scan mode in order to read people's thoughts. At certain points of the story, you can even use Fret's power to remind in order to get people to recall important information or to solve certain quests. But most importantly, you can see noise symbols and walk to them in order to trigger a battle. In true JRPG fashion, battles teleport you to a different dimension entirely, where you get to duke it out with a random group of enemies. In this case, in real time. The main difference, however, is that you don't get the usual group of options where you can attack, use magic, items or escape. Instead, you only get pins. You can equip a pin per character. Each pin has their own fixed button you need to press to use, and you can't equip different characters with pins that have the same input, at least at first. So you need to use your imagination and the powers of variety to get a balanced pin set. You don't need to worry about switching between characters in order to use their pins though. You can always just press the input you want and you will switch in an instant to the character whose input you pressed, which will immediately attack or support using the pin he's tied to. And you do all of this while still remaining in the exact same place, like the characters are teleporting to where you are. So no need to worry about suddenly switching to a character that's distant and losing your sense of positioning. Making matters even more streamlined and thankfully more fun is the fact that the entire team shares the same HP bar that increases as you level up, and that only the currently controlled character can get hit. So you can just ignore the rest of the party unless they got poisoned or are currently getting grabbed by an enemy, so you need to rescue them. You know, this kind of extra stuff, this kind of status effect stuff. But For most of the time, you can rest assured that every single mistake you make is your own and not caused by any dumb AI. Once you hit an enemy a certain amount of times, or well, with sufficient charge, it depends on the pin really, a blue circle will appear around it, and if you hit it with a different pin before the circle is gone, you will charge up your groove bar. Charge it up to 100% and you get to unleash a special attack, and you can charge it up even further later, as well as unlock an upgrade that displays an orange portion on the circle that, when you hit it while the circle is in that position, will grant you even more groove. However, you need to watch out as pins lose energy the more you use them, and you will need to wait some time for them to recharge or to reset completely when they're depleted. The combat, like most of the rest of the game, is based on getting into the rhythm of things, and there's a lot more precise timing and planning technique than there is just plain button mashing, which hopefully I don't need to tell you why that's a good thing. Combine all of that with the frankly absurd amount of pins with all sorts of different uses, gimmicks, and inputs, and you get to truly build a team that can play to your strengths. You really get to switch it up as you go along, and you end up experimenting with all kinds of different weapons, trying to find your personal style. And speaking of style, you also get to buy outfits and gear up your characters in all kinds of fashionable accessories, which thankfully, or maybe not, are unfortunately not displayed on the character models, as hilarious as that might have been in certain cases. But more importantly, you get to eat at restaurants, which, believe it or not, are your main source of leveling up stats. The way the game balances this is with a fullness bar. Eat too much and your fullness will break the bar's cap, and you will need to fight enemies in order to empty it before you're allowed to eat again. It's a pretty cool system that I misunderstood at first, which left me with severely underpowered characters until I took some time to grind out some stats. Both the combat and upgrade systems around them have quite a few more twists to them as well. You can complete side quests in order to get friendship points, and you can use those friendship points to unlock passive abilities. The way it works is that when you complete a side quest, you get some points, as well as unlocking the character that is related to the side quest on your skill tree, which is called a social network because the devs just couldn't help themselves. Well, as long as you have an unbroken chain of connected characters in it, because you know them and you help them, you can use the friendship points on any of them to unlock each character's individual passive ability. Or in the case of shopkeepers, you get exclusive equipment, or you unlock more items on the menu. On the more combat-oriented side of things, we got the mine dives, which is something that can happen sometimes in side quests and sometimes during the main storyline. During those times, Nagi will be able to dive into the minds of characters to clear their minds of noise. The thing is, mind noise is different from normal noise because they can come with various modifiers attached to them. They can deal increased damage, drain your HP, so long as they're alive, or simply be big, becoming boss tier annoyances. Mind dives have a time limit as well, and the faster you clear them, the more friendship points you get for clearing them, which is another advantage to clearing them out. I do have a couple nitpicks about the combat though, and I think this is the appropriate time to talk about them, so let's get to them. The first one is that you don't get to fight only Noise, you also get to fight against other players of the Reaper's game. And while that might sound cool, players are by far the most annoying enemies in the game. Boss fights against them notwithstanding, they are damage sponges that look boring visually since they are designed to be basically mobs to their far more interesting leaders, and their attacks are also boring. They never do anything as exciting or as cool as diving under the ground like the shark noise or holding down a party member like the wolf noise. They are just a boring chore to dispatch. But my second nitpick is where things get even worse. The way the plot is structured already makes things move at a snail's pace, but it gets even worse when a Shibuya Slam happens. A Shibuya Slam is basically a chapter where each team that is currently playing the Reaper's game gets a piece of turf on the map, and you must capture all of the turf in order to win. The problem is you need to get all of the places to proceed, meaning you need to capture all of the neutral turf that's filled with noise, which is pretty normal gameplay, but then you get into other teams' turf, where you must fight player after player in boring damage sponge filled combat, and you must repeat this again and again until you captured all of the streets. The first slam is particularly bad since it ends with a battle against players of all of the other teams one after another, which is basically torture at that point. The slams do get shorter though as the game progresses, because even the devs must have realized how repetitive they are. It doesn't help that during a slam, only the bare minimum of plot progression happens, if it happens at all. Usually right before and right at the end of the chapter, making the entire thing feel like boring filler for the sake of filler. Looking at the big picture though, the slams only happen a few times, and player battles happen a lot less frequently than noise battles, especially towards the end of the game during the final chapters where the plot finally picks up full steam ahead, so overall, that's why I consider these points nitpicks rather than deal breakers. It helps that all of this is offset by the combat's greatest trick, the one thing that I save for last because it's the best, even if it's not immediately apparent at first, and that is the fact that the game allows you to approach its combat in your own terms. You can change at any moment the difficulty from easy to normal to hard or whatever you prefer. And this isn't just your usual option hidden away in the menu, it is treated as a main feature that you are encouraged to play around with all over the campaign. The pins you can get from enemy drops vary based on difficulty, and you can even lower your level, thus lowering your max HP, not only for challenge purposes but to increase the drop rate of the pins as well. Now mix that and the fact that you only need to challenge noise when you feel like you want to, and that you can chain multiple noise battles for extra grinding goodness if you're so inclined, and you get a game that allows you to engage with its mechanics however you see fit. From grinding extra powerful pins to get ready for the next boss battle, to crazy level 1 challenge runs, all of it is possible. And that's worth any hassle to see firsthand, I believe. So, that's it for the gameplay. Did I forget anything? Oh yeah, you can chapter select in order to go back and finish side quests and other side content you missed. That's something that is not always implemented in RPGs, but that's usually because they are open world, while Neo The World Ends With You is a lot more linear. Well, that's it. Time for the conclusion. Who would I recommend this game for? Well, I would recommend it to people who love JRPGs and want to know where to get their next hit. But if you're tired of JRPGs, then Neo shakes things up enough that it might be what you need to revitalize your interest in the genre. And if you never played the JRPG, then this might be a good first choice as well. Its controls are intuitive, making it a very easy game to pick up, but the systems in place have a good amount of depth to keep you engaged hours in. I have no idea who I wouldn't recommend Neo to, and I guess I wouldn't recommend it to people who dislike anime. You know, boring people. So if you're boring, then maybe don't pick this up. Just kidding, I'm joking. Or am I? Either way, there is only one sure thing about this game, and that is the injustice that it won't win any awards for its soundtrack, even though it absolutely single-handedly blasts away every single other game OST to come out this year. But well, we're just gonna have to learn to live with that. That's it for today. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys eventually.